It is time, guys. It's time for my second and final book haul of 2024. So one of my main goals this year was to haul less books than I read. And we're obviously not quite at the end of the year. I still have pretty much a whole month of reading ahead of me. I have one more unboxing to film as well. But at this point, we are very, very close. I've slightly hauled more books than I've read at this point. I think I've hauled 104 books in total and I've read 101. But I have confidence that by the end of the year, I will have surpassed the amount, hopefully, fingers crossed, that I have hauled, and I will have succeeded in my 2024 goal. In terms of book hauls, so this is only the second one that I filmed this year. I obviously do unboxings every month, but what you will find in my book haul is all of the books that I have bought myself for whatever reason. So I don't include books that come in regular monthly subscription boxes in this video, just because I'm trusting a service to curate those books for me. So I don't know a great deal about them because I didn't research them ahead of time and then go out and pick them for myself, whereas the majority of the books that I am going to show you guys today are books that I have bought for a specific reason. So I have 39 in total. I think that that is pretty similar to what we hauled. When was my last book haul? I think it was in spring. So my last book haul was in May. It was 6 months ago now, and I hauled around 30 books then. So it is a similar amount for the second half of the year as it pretty much was for the first. But as usual, I'm going to be splitting this haul into sections of where I acquired these books from. So I have one arc from the publisher. I have some books that I bought secondhand. I have books that I have been gifted from my friends, or I've like taken them from their unhauls. I have special edition books that I've bought from subscription box companies, and I have a stack of books that I have bought new, some of which are pre-orders, some of which that I have picked up for various reasons. So we will, I guess, start off with the one arc, which I have sadly still not read, and I'm still mad about it. Throughout the last few months, I've just been very, very behind on my TBR, but that one is Gorse by Sam K. Horton. So this one is a historical fantasy, and it is set at the time, my favorite time period for historical fantasy, which is around the time that Christianity was sweeping through Europe and it was converting all of the countries that believed in like the old gods and the folklore of their countries were converted to Christianity, which resulted in the death of the folkloric creatures and the folklore and the belief that was kind of upholding them. So this one in particular is set in Cornwall, and one of the characters is a minister, I think, and I think that he's kind of struggling with his faith versus what he is seeing of folklore with his own eyes. Sounds right up my street. It sounds like it's going to be really atmospheric, and I am aiming to get to this before the end of the year, but it was published in September, so I am late. For the books that I picked up secondhand, the top one on the stack is one that I picked up from SciFi. So this is a perfect time to mention that I link all of the books that I mention in most of my videos down in my description box with a link to either SciFi or Books Please. Now they are two online bookstores. SciFi specializes in fantasy and sci-fi, and Books Please has a bit of everything. It has like non-fiction, contemporary, also sci-fi and fantasy. But I have a code down in my description box for either of those stores. It is Becca and the Books, and you will get a 5% discount on your entire order, and I will also receive a 5% commission on that as well at no extra cost to you guys. Like I said, I use SciFi pretty frequently myself. One, because they have pretty good prices on fantasy and sci-fi books, but also you can get secondhand books from there. So I think this cost me like £2, and the shipping on SciFi is like £1.50 to the UK, and it does ship all over the world. You can get international editions on there for like a pretty reasonable shipping fee as well. So this one is the second book in the Themis Files, which is a series that I listened to in audio, but I really enjoyed the first two books. I liked book 3 as well, but I really enjoyed the first two, so I wanted physical copies of the series. But this one is about a robot that is found buried beneath the earth. So one of our main characters, when she's a child, she falls into this hole and lands in like a giant robot hand, and she ends up in later life being recruited by this secret organization to find and assemble the parts of this robot to find out who put them there and like what their purpose is. The cool thing about this series is that it's mixed media. It's all told in transcripts, like interview files. So the audiobook is really cool as well because it's mixed media, and I definitely recommend consuming this in audio because I do actually think I obviously didn't read it physically, but I think given my experience with the story, it's much better in audio than it would be reading it physically. Weirdly, around the time that the 3 Body Problem was released on, was it Netflix that it was on? We were watching it anyway, which I've always wanted to pick up the series, but I kind of was in no rush to do so. And then a lot of Tesco's in the UK have a charity book table like after the checkouts. And while we were watching that after it had been released and I was thinking about picking it up, I found the 3 Body Problem on the Tesco table. Very similar themes to this one actually, and I remember we were watching this when I was reading this and I was getting them a little bit confused. This one is a Oh, I didn't know it was translated by Ken Liu. Oh, that's cool. I'm not going to tell you guys the synopsis because my synopsis is coming from the TV show anyway, not from the book, which I believe is quite a bit different. But it is set across a couple of timelines detailing a first contact with alien story that kind of starts with all of the technology in the world acting a little bit strange, and it has like VR in it, or like what appears to be VR but is actually alien tech. And it seemed like the kind of thing that I would enjoy, although I have heard that the character work in Citron Liu's books are not great. And then everything else I picked up secondhand, I picked up in a couple of separate Vinted orders because I have been reading through the Pretty Little Liars series by Sarah Shepard. So I already owned books 1 to 4 and also book 8, but I've just finished book 8. So I needed to fill in the gaps and I picked up Wicked and Killer, which were books 5 and 6. And then more recently, I picked up books 9, 10 and 11, which these are the 3 that I'm yet to read. If you all don't know what Pretty Little Liars is, it is a young adult mystery series about a group of girls whose friend goes missing. This friend was like the glue that held the group together, so after her disappearance they all go their separate ways up until they start receiving anonymous text messages from somebody who signs off as A, who is blackmailing them and threatening to reveal their secrets to the people they care about if they do not do what A wants them to. And as the series goes on, it gets more and more like wildly dramatic and the stakes get higher and higher. Not necessarily a series that I would recommend unless you're of a similar age to me and also were a fan of the TV show in like 2010 through to whenever it finished airing, but I have been having a great time with it and I'm really glad that I picked this series up on a whim. I've owned it for ages and I was really close to just unhauling it unread, but I decided to give it a chance and I've been having a great time. So in terms of the things that have been gifted to me, I have quite a few that I've stolen from my friends' unhaul piles. So my friend Beth gave me a bunch of contemporary romances that she had read and enjoyed but like felt no need to keep, and I also would like to read, potentially enjoy them and potentially not keep them, but I actually don't know too much about these. I only know that they're pretty hyped on Book Talk, at least 2 of them, and then one of them is by an author that I actually really like. So the hyped ones are Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. I think that this one is an ice hockey romance. That is all that I know about this. Oh, is she an ice? She's a skater, I think. Oh, so I think that she needs a partner for like an ice skating championship and she gets the captain of the hockey team to kind of fill in for her. The other one is Done and Dusted by Lila Sage. All I know is that the world is in like a yeehaw phase at the moment and this is a cowboy romance of some degree. That's it. That's all I know. And then the other one that I have is Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert. I love the Brown Sisters series by Talia Hibbert, but this one was not high on my list of priorities to pick up because it is Talia Hibbert's young adult romance. But as Beth was unhauling this, I thought that it was a perfect opportunity for me to pick it up and give it a try. Leanne from Literary Diversions recently received it was a few months ago now, but she received a PR box from a publisher and then they accidentally sent her a duplicate box, so she sent the book in the second box to me, and they contained 2 horror books by V. Castro. The first one is The Haunting of Alejandra. I think that this one is about a Mexican like folk demon that is haunting a woman who is already like struggling mentally with some things. And then this one always reminds me of like erotica based on the cover, but that one is Immortal Pleasures, once again a horror, and this one is about an ancient Aztec vampire. My friend Ryan went to a sign-in for Sarah Elarifi and I think he picked himself up a new copy of this book, so he got his Waterstones edition signed and personalized to me. But that one is Feybound by Sarah Elarifi. This one is one that I've already read and enjoyed. I also have the Goldsboro edition and I am a really big fan of Sarah Elarifi. This one is following 2 sisters, one of which gets banished from the land that they're from. I think they're elves and they're from the Elven land. This is a land that used to have fae, human and elves, but now only the elves have survived, and she gets banished because of a prophecy that her sister gives her, and she kind of takes a chance at glory that fails. And when she's banished, her sister feels obviously guilt for her prophecy, so decides to follow her sister into banishment, as well as her sister's second in command, because she was like a general in the army. They follow her into banishment and they end up stumbling across the Feylands. I did really enjoy this one, but I do prefer Sarah El-Arifi's other series, which I do have the final book in that series coming up in this video a little bit later on. Earlier this year, I went to San Diego and I met up with one of my patrons, Millie, who very, very kindly gifted me 2 books in one of her favorite series. So I actually already own book 1, and it's one that I'm excited to get to. So thank you very much to Millie for gifting book 2 and 3. But they are the Icosar Falcon and also the Dragon of Jin Seong, which are books 2 and 3 in the Chronicles of the Bitch Queen. So this one is following a woman who is about to become the queen of a war-torn land. I think that her marriage is part of like a peace treaty, and I'm pretty sure before she gets married her husband disappears, which leaves her reign obviously like fraught with tension, and she's summoned to some sort of meeting which ends in disaster. I'm pretty sure her son gets kidnapped throughout the course of this, like the first book, and it ends up with her on a path for revenge and also to reclaim her son. I think in the original war of this world she was a great warrior, but since then obviously like it's been a few years and she kind of has to get back at it. And then I was gifted 2 books from the lovely Ash, who is of course another one of my patrons whom I love very dearly. And the first one is one of my favorite books of the year, which is The Will of the Many by James Islington. This one is the first book in an adult epic fantasy series that is set in a world that has a magic system based on a pyramid scheme. So everybody cedes will to somebody in the pyramid above them, and our main character is from a country that was conquered by the kingdom that operates this magic system, and so he is doing everything he can to stay out of this system, but he is dragged into it when he is offered a place at a prestigious military academy to spy on the person who runs it, because his benefactor, who is a man who has adopted him from an orphanage, believes that the leader of this academy was responsible for the death of his brother. Would definitely recommend this one if you're like a Sanderson fan or a Red Rising fan. And then the second book that Ash sent me, I don't know very much about, I just know that it's romantasy, and it is The Veiled Kingdom by Holly Renee. I know that this one centers around a rebellion and the daughter of a king who has run away to escape her father's cruelty, who ends up kidnapped and kind of forced to join this rebellion. And I'm assuming that the romance comes in with the leader of the rebellion, who seems to be a prominent part of this story. For the book that I've picked up new over the months, I grabbed a couple of them in San Diego. One is one that I intentionally went there to buy, which is Lore Olympus Volume 6, and this is the Barnes & Noble edition, which has a cover that is so cute, and it's also so much nicer than the regular edition, which is why I wanted to pick this up as like the main book that I got from San Diego. So this is the 6th volume in the webcomic series that is being bound into physical editions. I don't know if volume 7 is out actually. I didn't pre-order it, so I don't have it, but I think it might be. But this one is a Hades and Persephone retelling. It does also feature the other gods of Olympus, but the dominant focus of the story is Hades and Persephone. And while this does not shy away from some of the darker elements of the Greek gods and Greek mythology, like child abuse, sexual assault, and domestic abuse, the relationship between Hades and Persephone is very, very wholesome, which is why I love this series so much. I also really love this one because it is modernized, like the gods rule over cities, so like the underworld is like Hades' business empire. It brings it up to like modern day, makes it relatable and funny, whilst also loosely following the stories of Greek mythology. The second one that I picked up is a manga that I want to try. It's a bit crinkly because it came with like an art card, but it is volume 1 of The Summer Hikaru Died by Moku Makurin, and this is one that I had seen in the UK and I was intrigued, but honestly, like, I don't need new series, new manga series, new regular series. I do not need them, but because this did come with the extra art card, I was like, fine. And this one, as far as I remember, I'm not sure if it's classed as a horror, but it seems pretty spooky. Like, the covers don't look spooky, but I'm pretty sure it's following a boy whose best friend goes goes up a mountain and he comes back a different person. That's all I know, but I'm intrigued and I hope I enjoy it. I also went to Rare again this year, which is Rare stands for Romance Author and Reader Events. It's essentially like a Polycon and Book Bonanza. It's like a big sign-in that happens in either Scotland or London, like it alternates between years. So this year it was in Edinburgh, and I said I wasn't going to pick up any books while I was there, but I did. So I picked up four in total, and then I've also since picked up the sequel to one of them. So one that I didn't pay for, it was on the free table, is Into the Tide by Laura Pavlov. I picked up a book from Laura Pavlov last year at Rare that was on the free table. Have I read it yet? No, but I just really love the covers, and also interestingly the same cover model is on this one as is on the other one that I picked up. But Laura Pavlov writes predominantly small town romances, so this one is the first book in the Cottonwood Cove series. I don't know if I'm a small town romance kind of girl. I guess we'll find out in the future. All I really know about this one in terms of the plot is that it has the brother's best friend trope. I also picked up a book that I've already read so that I could have it signed by the author, because I previously read this on, I think, Prime Reading, and that is Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas, which I loved this book when I read it. I gave it 5 stars. This one is a bully romance following 2 young people, I think they're like 18, who have been pen pals for the last 7 years. They live in neighboring towns, however they have never met. One of them gets transferred to the other school, but he doesn't tell her that he's been transferred, and in her letters she seems like really sweet, she's nice, she's open, she's dealing with some stuff at home, and when he gets to her school he realizes that she's like the school's it girl. He's like a bad boy, and he like has a little fun tormenting her for a while. It is massive red flags, so many red flags in here, but I had a good time. I mean, it's a bully romance, so there's bullying, but I really liked it. One that I don't really know much about, but I'm really hoping for good things, is the Book of Azreal by Amber V. Nicole. I think that I've heard this one is pretty dark, and I think it follows somebody who is searching for a lost relic. I think it also contains gods as like the main fantastical theme of the series, but that is literally all I can tell you. And then the one that I picked up that I have since read is A Kiss of Iron by Claire Sager. I love this hefty indie paperback. So much so that even though I read this on KU, I also picked up the sequel, and I've actually read these back to back super recently. I've really enjoyed them, and book 3 should be coming out at the end of December. But this one is a high fantasy romance series following a penniless noblewoman who was forced into an arranged marriage 10 years before the start of the story, and her husband has been gallivanting around the fantastical version of Europe in this world, racking up debt that the main character is working her ass off on their estate to pay. To subsidize her income, she has become the Wicked Lady, which is a highwaywoman, and one day she steals an orrery from a powerful Fey noble. He perceives this as a very valuable item, and he is not happy about it, so when somebody comes to knock on her door the day after, she is of course assuming it is him. However, it is a courier summoning her to the royal palace to become a lady in waiting to the queen. Then when she arrives at the palace, the royal spy master pulls her aside and tasks her with spying on a Fey noble that he thinks is hatching a plot to overthrow and like destabilize their kingdom. And lo and behold, the Fey noble that Kat has been tasked with spying on is the Fey man that she stole an orrery from, and he has not forgotten what she has taken from him. This was like a really compelling series. I really got sucked into the world. It is a slow one, kind of akin to things like From Blood and Ash and the Plated Prisoner series, and I just had a really good time, so much so that I went straight from book 1 into book 2, and I had a great time with this one as well. I've also had, I think, just 2 pre-orders come in. I've had more pre-orders, but they're like subscription box special editions that we'll get to in a minute. But one that I've read, and actually I think I'm going to unhaul this, is Somewhere Beyond the Sea by TJ Klune. This one is the sequel to The House in the Cerulean Sea. It's more of a companion novel because you can read The House in the Cerulean Sea as a complete package. You don't need to read any more from this world. But The House in the Cerulean Sea follows a guy called Linus, who is essentially a social worker for magical children, but he's sent to the house in the Cerulean Sea to investigate and make sure the children are being taken care of. But he's actually really kind of been sent to dig up some evidence on why these children are dangerous and don't deserve like the care that they're getting. And throughout the course of the story, he kind of like opens up and comes out of his shell and becomes a better person. So book 2 is about Arthur, who is the guy who runs the house in the Cerulean Sea, and plot wise it is kind of a repeat of book 1, which I didn't really love about it. If you really love the house in the Cerulean Sea, then you may find value from kind of reading the same story again for the vibes, which I did really love the vibes. But in terms of like the plot and stuff, like I just don't really think this needed to exist, which is why I will probably end up unhauling this one. And then my other pre-order was The Republic of Salt by Ariel Kaplan, which is the sequel to The Pomegranate Gate, which was one of my favorite books of last year. So The Pomegranate Gate is a historical fantasy set in a world that is inspired by medieval Spain, and we are following 2 main characters. Our female main character can walk but she cannot run, and she can speak but she cannot shout. This is set at a time once again where Christianity is sweeping through the world and it is converting all of the citizens of all of the places to Christianity, and the Jewish people of this city have been told that they can either leave the city or convert to Christianity. So our main characters are leaving the city when Toba starts to fall behind, and she cannot let anybody know that she's falling behind, and she cannot speed up, and she kind of starts to be shepherded by this guy who's clearly up to no good. And our other main character, Naphtali, sees this happening and he follows them into the woods, where he sees Toba disappear into the Pomegranate Gate into another dimension. So he then goes to try and find help, and he finds Toba's grandmother, and they go on an adventure to try and find Toba, which is one of my favorite parts of this book. On the flip side of that, Toba in her other dimension has found herself on a crumbling estate with a grumpy lord and his cousin, and the 2 worlds are kind of like the upheaval, the political upheaval is mirrored in both worlds. A couple more books that I picked up from SciFi were books 2 and 3 in the Age of Madness series by Joe Abercrombie, which are The Trouble with Peace and The Wisdom of Crowds. These ones were the final 2 books for the last round of Catch Up Book Club, which was of course First Law Along, and they are the second 2 books in a trilogy that is following the Industrial Revolution in this fictional world, and how that is kind of destabilizing the nobility and also causing like a workers' uprising. Sounds super boring, but this is more of a character driven story than anything else, so it is mainly following how all of this stuff is impacting our characters' lives, and also how they're trying to manipulate it and wriggle out of it or deal with the consequences of kind of what's going on. I then picked up a few books for Patreon. So the first one is, oh, I actually picked this up at Rare, I forgot. This one is the first book in the next series for my Patreon book club, which is Lady of Darkness by Melissa K. Roweridge. So my Patreon book club is a fantasy romance book club where we read through entire series. So it's like Catch Up Book Club, but instead of adult epic fantasy, it's fantasy romance. And this one is following a woman who is sent by an assassin lord to spy on a Fae Fire Lord, and if she completes the job that has been laid out for her, then she will be able to seek her revenge for the death of her mother that happened 10 years ago. And I think that the Fae Fire Lord did it, or at least she believes that he did. But with this being a fantasy romance, I'm not sure that he actually did, but I guess I'll find out. And then 2 of my recent Patreon picks that I'm hoping to get to before the end of the year is The Deer and the Dragon by Piper CJ. This one is I think it's a romantasy again, but I think it's more of an urban fantasy. And all I really know about this one is that it centers around Norse mythology. And then one that I'm very excited about is Daughter of the Drowned Empire by Frankie Diane Malice. This one, it seems like it's set in a little bit of a complex fantasy world, which we all know that I love. And this one I thought was set in a world where magic is outlawed, but I'm not sure if it's actually a world where you need magic. And the main character goes through this ceremony that would reveal her magic, and then it turns out that she doesn't have any. It says she has 7 months to train as one of the kingdom's most brutal warriors and survive training at the academy. And I mean, a war academy is literally one of my favorite things. And then the last stack that we have is books that I have ordered from subscription box companies outside of their regular monthly subscriptions. So these are ones that I've picked up most likely because I have a matching edition of like the first book in the series or something kind of related to them. Like with our first one, which is Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. I still need to put the other dust jacket on this one. I'm surprised I haven't done it already. But this one is the most recent of Ali Hazelwood's feminist books, which are some of my favorite contemporary romances. I really, really like Ali Hazelwood. And this one is following a biologist, a biotech engineer, and I think that the male main character is somebody who works for the company that is trying to buy out the place where the main character works. And I'm assuming she's against this. Maybe because of capitalism, but that's just an assumption. That is the only one I think that I have from Illumicrate. That one's an Afterlight edition. But from Goldsboro, I have The Ending Fire by Sarah El-Arifi. I told you there was more Sarah El-Arifi coming up. This one is the final book in the Ending Fire trilogy, which is an adult fantasy series set in a world where the people are separated according to the color of their blood. So the reds are the nobility, the blue bloods are like the working class and like the peasants, and then you have the translucent blooded people that are essentially enslaved. And our three main characters are a person from each of these blood colors, but the main two characters we follow are associated with a failed rebellion. There was a rebellion group that took red-blooded children and raised them among the blue bloods so that they would know the oppression faced by the lower classes, with the intention of putting them into a competition for red-blooded people that chooses the next leaders of the world. However, this rebellion has failed, so now we are following a blue-blooded woman who has grown up amongst red-blooded people, and she suffers a lot of hatred from her family because she's only essentially been kept alive so that they're not embarrassed by the fact that somebody infiltrated their home. And also a red-blooded girl who was raised in this failed rebellion who has now got no purpose in life and is a drug addict. And then the rest of them are all fairy loot editions. So I have Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig. This one is the second book in, is it called the Shepherd King duology? But it is like a dark gothic folkloric fantasy duology following a girl who has a monster in her head that is like slowly taking over her mind. The magic in this world is associated with, I think they're called Providence cards, but they're like tarot cards, and each one comes with like a power but also a drawback. It's a really cool world, but I do think I'm gonna have to reread the first book before I dive into this one because I have forgotten quite a lot. I also have The Undermining of Twilight and Frank, which is the second book in a series of like fantasy romance companion novels, I guess, by Megan Bannon. This one is following Twilight and Frank, who I think, is this the When Harry Met Sally retelling? Yeah, the first one is You've Got Mail. This one is When Harry Met Sally, and I think book 3 is going to be Sleepless in Seattle, maybe? Correct me if I'm wrong, or don't, because it's not that big a deal. But this one is following Twyla, who is in her middle years. She's also widowed, and I think that the love interest in here is her partner, like her work partner and also neighbor, who I think is a little bit younger than her. I really loved the first one, which was The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy, because it was really quirky and I just kind of fell in love with it. The world, I don't want to say it's not well developed, but it kind of has massive gaps in it that you just kind of have to roll with, but it also provides like a really cool backdrop for the story, I feel, in this series. I also have Queen Bee by Juno Dawson, which is a prequel to Her Majesty's Royal Coven series. So Her Majesty's Royal Coven is a contemporary fantasy series set in Yorkshire. It is following members of this childhood group of friends. They were a coven. They're all witches. They were a coven when they were younger. There was a war between witches and warlocks when they were in their early 20s, and after that they've kind of all gone their separate ways, but one of them is now the leader of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, which is the governing body of witches, and she asks her friend, who still lives in their hometown and is working as a vet, like she uses her magical abilities to help animals, and she asks her to rehabilitate this child who is part of a prophecy, which is that when the sullied child appears, it will herald the end of days. So the one who is the leader of Her Majesty's Royal Coven asks her friend to rehabilitate this child to stop this prophecy from happening. So Queen Bee is actually about the origins of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, which takes it back to Anne Boleyn, and this short novella is set after Anne Boleyn has died, following the people or the witches that were closest to her, as one of them, who was in love with Anne Boleyn, is trying to find out who is responsible for her death. I also picked up a Fairy Loot edition of one of my favorite books, which is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. So this one is a book from the 80s. It is most famous, I think. I mean, Diana Wynne Jones is pretty popular, but this was also made into a Ghibli movie. But this one is following a young woman called Sophie who gets cursed into the body of an old lady, and she decides that this is the thing that's going to kind of spur her to make great change in her life. So she just like leaves. She just gets up and she walks off into the hills where she finds Howl's Moving Castle, which is it's a castle that moves, like it's on legs, and she stumbles inside and she ends up becoming like, is she like a housekeeper or apprentice to this wizard called Howl, who is like zany and eccentric and doesn't really appreciate her presence to start off with. Really cool story. It is a middle grade technically, I believe, but it's kind of one of the ones that has value to people who read it of any age. Like, I imagine it's the kind of one that you would read with children, and lots of people at different ages can gain value from it. And when I read it, I gave it 5 stars and I fell in love with it. And then I think the final book that we're going to be talking about today, which is great because my battery's nearly dead, is Wisteria by Adeline Grace, which is the final book in the Belladonna trilogy that may not be called the Belladonna trilogy, but is a trilogy that starts with Belladonna by Adeline Grace. And this one is a gothic young adult fantasy series following a woman who has been surrounded by death her entire life. When she was a baby, her family, and I think it was at a party, everybody died apart from her. And since then, she's been passed from pillar to post. She's grown up with various guardians, all who are promised a big slice of her inheritance if they look after her until she comes of age. However, they have all also died, and they're also not great people. So she's approaching the age where she's going to come into her inheritance herself anyway, when she's shipped to the last relative that she has, which I think is like a distant cousin. And when she arrives, she finds out that her cousin has died, and her husband, like her cousin's husband, is in mourning. So her cousin died, I'm saying cousin, I don't know if they're cousins, but this lady has died of a mysterious illness that is now also afflicting her daughter. And when the main character arrives, she's treated better than she ever has been by any guardian that she's ever had, and so she doesn't want any more bad fortune to befall this family, and she doesn't want this death curse that she's carrying around to afflict them either. So she starts to look into the reason behind this illness, because she doesn't necessarily think that it's this like naturally occurring illness that it is supposed to be. I have still only read book 1, but I have books 1 and 3 in the Fairy Loot edition because I didn't get book 2. I missed the sale for it, and then I picked up a regular edition, and then Fairy Loot reprinted it, but I didn't want to buy it again because I'd already bought the second one full price. So yeah, I've got books 1 and 3 in the Fairy Loot edition now, but I do love me a gothic fantasy, which is why I really loved Belladonna. So I'm hoping that I will also enjoy the rest of the series. And now that I have them all, I can read. I need to actually read series when they're all published, and I say this all of the time because I do start series and then I like have momentum to pick up like book 2, but if book 3 is not released, by the time it's released, kind of the momentum's gone. But then when I also have them all, I'm not picking them up, so I really need to do that at some point in the future. So those are all of the books that I've hauled over the last 6 months, and by all of them I mean most of them, because like I said, I do not include like regular monthly subscription box editions in these videos just because I don't really have too much to say about them, so it feels kind of pointless. But I'm actually really proud of my progress this year. I know that I still hauled like 100 books, which isn't too many less than what I typically haul, but I have definitely been more mindful about my purchases. Like when it comes to me browsing bookstores and I see a book that I'm interested in, instead of just being like, oh, I've heard good things about that, I'll buy it, I think more like, am I going to read it anytime soon? And if the answer is no, then there's no point in me buying it. Most of these decisions have been driven by my lack of space as well, and also not being willing to expand my library anymore. Like I have a lot of books, I have around 1,000 books, and I don't need more or want more than 1,000 books. So that was also one of the main contributing factors to me being a little bit more mindful of my book buy-in, and I definitely anticipate that I'm going to stay on that same track into the coming year. And I think I'm also going to stick with the same goal of having to read more books than I haul, just so that there's like a good solid way of actually tracking that. But down in the comments, let me know if you've read any of these books, especially the ones that I haven't got to yet. Let me know if there's any you think that I should prioritize. But aside from that, if you guys would like to let me know that you were here but you don't feel like you have anything to say, then please leave a rabbit emoji, which I'm pretty sure there is one. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you will find a link to my Goodreads, my Instagram, and my Patreon if you would like to follow me on any of those. But that is it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.